Today, we are diving into the incredible history of Oman. It's a nation forged in the fires of ancient migrations, a huge maritime empire, deep internal divisions, and honestly, one of the most dramatic turnarounds of the entire 20th century. So let's get into it.
First things first, to really get Oman, you have to wrap your head around just how deep its history goes. And I'm not talking a few thousand years. We're talking over 100,000. Archaeologists have literally found stone tools there that date back about 106,000 years. This discovery completely changed things, putting Oman right at the heart of humanity's earliest journeys.
So here's how we're going to break down this epic story. We'll start with its ancient origins and the faith that came to define it. Then we'll watch its rise as a massive maritime power, see how that empire got split in two, explore the conflicts that followed, and finally witness its incredible modern renaissance.
Okay, so our story really begins with the two things that make Oman, well, Oman. Its ancient land, which was a super important crossroads in prehistory, and the unique faith that would steer its destiny for more than 1,000 years.
The science here is just fascinating. So picture this. About 130,000 years ago, the Red Sea was way shallower than it is today. At the same time, the Arabian Peninsula was actually green and lush. This created a perfect highway for early humans walking out of Africa, and Oman was a prime piece of real estate on that route.
Now, being in such a strategic spot, it's a classic double-edged sword. For centuries, it meant being stuck in the shadow of huge empires. The Persians, the Parthians, the Sasanians. Oman was often under someone else's thumb. And you have to remember this long history of being dominated to understand why they fought so hard for independence later on.
Then, in the year 751, something happened that is arguably the single most important event in Omani history. They adopted a unique branch of Islam called Ibadism. Now, here's the key. The ruler, the imam, isn't hereditary. He's chosen by the community. It's not about bloodlines, it's about consent. In a land of competing tribes, this idea was a game changer. It created a unity that a king never could.
And with this powerful new identity, Oman was ready to flip the script. After centuries of being ruled by others, they were about to become a colonial power themselves. They were going to turn the tables on the very European forces that had dominated them.
The year is 1650. This is the moment everything changes. For nearly a century and a half, the Portuguese had controlled the crucial port city of Muscat. But in 1650, the Omanis drove them out. This wasn't just about getting their city back. It was the launch pad for their own empire. They weren't defending anymore. They were on the attack.
And what an empire it became. At its peak, Oman controlled a massive trade network that stretched clear across the Indian Ocean. Their center of power was the unbelievably wealthy island of Zanzibar, and their influence reached all along the Swahili coast of Africa and even to parts of modern-day Pakistan. This whole empire was built on controlling trade, and it was funded by commerce, including the brutal and very profitable slave trade.
But, as we so often see in history, what goes up must come down. Empires built that fast can unravel just as quickly. And for Oman, the 19th century brought a perfect storm of economic shocks and internal family drama.
The financial engine of the entire empire was the slave trade. So when Great Britain started to crack down on it in the mid-1800s, Oman's economy didn't just slow down, it completely collapsed. The effect was catastrophic. The population of Muscat, the capital, dropped from 55,000 people to just 8,000 as everyone fled to Zanzibar to try to save their fortunes.
First, the economic collapse, and right on its heels, a political one. After the Sultan died, his sons started fighting over who would inherit the empire. Britain eventually stepped in, and the result, in 1861, was that the empire was formally sliced in two. One son got Zanzibar and the African territories, and the other got Muscat and Oman. The great empire was shattered.
And this split created, for all intents and purposes, two different Omans living side by side. You had the coast, ruled by the Sultan, which was worldly, open to trade, and more secular, and then you had the interior, Oman proper, ruled by the Imam. This Oman was isolated, tribal, and deeply religious. These two worlds were on a collision course.
And you can probably guess what happened next. That collision course led to a century of conflict. It kept the nation broken, isolated from the world, and very, very poor.
Throughout the 20th century, these tensions just kept boiling over. There was a treaty in 1920 that created a fragile peace. But that truce shattered in 1954, the moment oil was discovered in the interior. The Sultan made his move, and it kicked off a war. As if that wasn't enough, another fire ignited in 1964, a separatist rebellion in the south. The country was literally tearing itself apart.
And just when it looked like the country was going to completely implode, we get to the climax of our story. This is the moment in 1970 that led to the birth of modern Oman. They call it the Renaissance.
To really appreciate what comes next, you have to understand just how bad things were before 1970. The ruler, Sultan Saeed bin Taimur, was extremely conservative. The country was almost totally cut off from the world. It was riddled with disease, illiteracy, and poverty. The Sultan even banned things like electricity and radios. It was so bad that thousands of people fled into exile. Then, in 1970, his son, Qaboos bin Said, overthrew him in a palace coup, and he did not waste a single second. He immediately got rid of his father's crazy rules, offered amnesty to his enemies, and told the exiles to come home. With British and Iranian help, he ended the rebellions, and then he took the country's oil money and started building everything. Schools, hospitals, roads, where basically nothing had existed before. But it wasn't just about roads and hospitals. This was nation building. Sultan Qaboos carefully constructed the entire political system of a modern country. He created a government that balanced all the different tribes, introduced the first ever written constitution in 1996, and set up a consultative assembly. He literally built a stable, modern government from scratch. Think about that. One man, the architect of modern Oman, ruled for almost 50 years. His death in January 2020 really was the end of an era. The succession was peaceful, and his cousin Haytham bin Tariq now leads the country into its next chapter. So that brings us to today. Oman's journey has been absolutely extraordinary, from an ancient human crossroads to a stable modern nation. And the big question for its future is this: how will it balance that unique, ancient identity with its critical modern role right at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, one of the most tense regions on Earth? To explore more stories of how nations were forged, check out our Quick Country Histories playlist right here on Notebook Summaries. And if you found this explainer useful, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.